Oh, broken.
Hi and welcome to this Cosmia Festival 2021 event brought to you in partnership with Kirklees Libraries. You can find details on the rest of the programme by visiting our website, which is cosmiafestival.co.uk, or by finding us on social media where we're Cosmia Festival basically everywhere. If you want to support the festival further, we have our Ko-Fi link which helps fund future editions like 2022, where we should have a full programme and be back in person, fingers crossed. But for now, stay safe, enjoy the show, and we'll see you very soon.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our second Cosmia author event of the day. I hope you were able to join Geraldine McCaughrean earlier on today. If not, don't worry, you can still catch the show by checking out our Kirklees Libraries YouTube or Facebook channels. But let's get started with this evening's event. It's Kirklees Libraries and Cosmia Festival's absolute pleasure to introduce you all to Lavie Tidhar. Lavie is a multi-award winning author, thank you, whose works span and combine a wide variety of genre. And his work has been compared to that of Philip K. Dick. You can see why we're really excited about this evening. While we'll be mostly focusing on all things sci-fi and fantasy this evening, I bet we could just as easily have been discussing historical fiction, poetry, writing for children, or thrillers. That's Lavie's range of books that he writes. Joining us this evening are also Mark and Sonia from Kirklees Libraries. Thank you. Before we start, I just want to let you know that our friends at Read in Home First Bookshop are offering a discount to the Cosmia audience, but I'll let you know at the end of the evening how you access that discount. So let's get started. Lavie, welcome to Kirklees.
Thank you. Well, virtually. It's a bit further north, but it's lovely to be here.
Thank you. Mark, over to you.
Hi, Lavie. So I thought I'd start off with something nice, hopefully nice and easy. So what does a typical writing day look like for yourself?
I think anyone who tells you it's a hard work is lying. I tend to be one of those people who work at night. I think you've got the writers who get up super early in the morning and write, and then you have the people who work late at night. And there's like two people who keep office hours, as far as I know. Like no one. I don't know anyone who keeps office hours. So for me, it's really kind of waiting for everything to be quiet before I even start, and then kind of hypnotizing myself with bad TV until my brain starts melting. So it's a very weird way of doing stuff, but it seems to work. And if it works, you don't want to mess with it.
Yeah.
So what I find is in the morning I will do things like if any editing or copy editing, anything that requires kind of thinking and being awake, and then in the evening I'll just do the writing bit, which is the fun bit.
Yeah. When do you get time then to do your research? Do you do much research? Does a writing process involve much research for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I research all the time, but I mean, we're very lucky these days that you have so much information easily accessible from the computer. Yeah. And I'm one of those terribly lazy writers. I'm not one of those people. I mean, have you ever met those writers who are like, well, I'm not sure what the color of the bricks are, so I'm going to have to fly to France for the weekend just to check. And I've met those people, they're real. Whereas I'm just going to Google it, bro.
Lavie, I'm just curious. You said you like to watch bad TV. I'm really curious as to what bad TV would be. What would make your brain melt?
Well, no, to be honest, I like watching good TV, which is much harder to do. But I'll watch pretty much anything that comes on that you can watch, And I mean, it's the golden age of television, isn't it? Which is great because you can just binge something. I think at the moment I kind of thought I'll see I'm rewatching Seinfeld, or watching Seinfeld, because I never watched much of it, just to see what the 90s were like. And the 90s were a very weird period. So that's, and then after like a couple of episodes, you think, I better get on. With stuff.
Excellent, thank you.
So where does your inspiration come from? Because you've, like Kirsty says, you've written in so many different genres. Where do you take your inspiration from?
I don't know. It comes from everywhere. I mean, I have a bit of a magpie sort of approach, as you can see. So I think for me, is, the ideas are easy, but I get a lot of ideas that I think other people could do, and if other people could do them, it probably doesn't need me to do it. So it's about me finding something that only I could do, to grab me enough to then start doing it.
So in terms of your physical writing process, I don't know if you've ever heard the terms of gardener and architect. So a gardener as a writer would be somebody who has an idea and just writes and flows with the idea, and an architect would be somebody who would meticulously plan everything. So the plot, where the characters are going to go, maybe what they're going to say. How would you describe yourself in those terms? Do you fit that kind of box or boxes?
I mean, I have to be honest, I think I'll be a terrible gardener and a terrible architect. I'm not really good at very many things. Yeah, I mean, I think when I started out, I did kind of do a lot of the writing and trying to figure out where it goes. And what happens with that is that if you take a wrong turn, you suddenly realize you've lost half a book, which happened to me once. I wrote this book, and the first part was okay, and the second part wasn't, and I kind of knew it, but I pushed through, and of course it wasn't good, so I had to cut. So one day you have a book, and the next day you have half a book, and you have to start almost from scratch. It's not a fun thing to do. So these days I'm a lot more conscious of the structure. These days I know what ending I usually know the ending, and I'm going to try and work my way to the ending while leaving myself plenty of room within it. The one exception to that is writing, which is weird because I never thought I'd be the sort of person who could do it, but doing sort of golden age Agatha Christie style mysteries, which I've been doing with a vampire detective.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I just thought it would be really funny to do Agatha Christie with vampires, but I never thought I would have the skill to come up with, it's like a puzzle. And in that case, that you can't write it blind. You have to basically, the hard part is to sit down and plan every single detail. And you have, it's a formula. So you have to figure out who the murderer is, who the victim is, who the suspects are. Each one of the suspects have to have a credible motive, could have been the killer, planting the clues. Or it's very, very architectural in that particular case. And once you actually get to writing it, it's super quick because you've done all the hard lifting. So it's just almost like filling in the blanks. And I never thought I'd be able to do sort of, that sort of plotting. It's, never really expected to do. So I keep thinking I can't pull this off again,
Do you have a writing goal then? A daily writing goal that you have to reach?
Well, when I started, I started writing short stories, and I never really stopped. I mean, that's still my favorite thing. So when I started, I kind of said, try and do 500 words a day, because that's how stuff gets written. And I didn't want to set a high goal to myself. I'm not really, again, I'm not one of those people who can knock out, a massive amount of writing in a day. So I always kind of thought, as long as you have 500 words, that's great. And when I started out, I really tried to do that every day. And now, maybe I'm a little bit more confident in what I do. So but that would still be my minimum target. And then if anything above that would be nice. That's and I think people have this idea that I'm very prolific, but I think the reason is because I do a lot of different things at the same time, maybe, but not because I'm a very fast writer. I really don't. And if I do end up writing a lot in one day, the next day I won't do anything. So I didn't really gain anything by doing that.
So which about yourself and the books that you've read, so which books have influenced you most as a writer? Which authors have influenced yourself as a writer?
I mean, it changes all the time, doesn't it? It changes all the time. And also, I think if you're lucky, maybe once a year or once every 2 years, you'll find a writer that does have, like a writer who's new to you that does have an influence, just because they're doing something new that you haven't seen before. And you think, oh, I'm going to steal that, And I think the best way to be original is to just steal from people that no one reads anymore. That's originality essentially. Which doesn't really answer your question, but yeah, I mean it varies. I mean, if you look at books like A Man Lies Dreaming, which is one of my favorite books, it's a book that is very much in conversation with Raymond Chandler, who I love, but also I'm very aware of all the problems with Raymond Chandler. And so it was a book that allowed me to parody Chandler and also have a conversation, almost be in dialogue with what he was doing. So that's a case where, you can see that book wouldn't really be there without Chandler. In this new book I've got called The Escapement, which came out in the States, that's inspired by surrealism. So it has influences by Michael Ender, for example, who wrote The Never-Ending Story. So that's the only thing people know him for in English. But he was a very important German writer and children's writer, and he also actually wrote surrealist short fiction. So books like Momo and A Mirror, I think it's called A Mirror in the Mirror, which is his adult surrealist book. So and a lot of picture books, weirdly enough. So The Escapement is really influenced by picture books, which I think don't really get the respect that they deserve as an art form, because when they work, they are so magnificent. The way that the art and the text combines in a very minimalist way sometimes, to just be really powerful. So I was channeling a lot of that sort of visual storytelling when I was writing.
Yeah.
So it changes all the time.
Do you still read in the genre then?
Sorry, you go for it, Mark. You go.
Do you still read in the genre? Do you still read the stuff that you write? Other authors. So if you're writing a fantasy or sci-fi, do you still read other authors in that field?
Yeah, I mean, I read. Obviously, firstly, I have a book column for the Washington Post that I've been on science fiction and fantasy books that I write with Silvia Moreno Garcia, and we've been doing that for I think the last 2 years. As crazy as that sounds, we kind of thought it was going to be 6 months tops, and they still let us do it. So I have no choice but to try and keep up with the field and kind of get books sent. But also, both Sylvia and myself, we like the very quirky, odd stuff that isn't really the mainstream. So 90% of the genre stuff we get sent, is either successful enough on its own that it doesn't need us, or it's just a little samey. And we're always looking for the odd stuff that people don't know about. And then when we write about it for the Post, people say, but why? But how could you not mention, Interview with a Vampire or Twilight or Stephen King? We have to start with Stephen King for every column. People know who Stephen King is. They don't need us for it. So I try to keep up. And also, the other thing I do is I edit these international science fiction anthologies. I think the Best of World SF just came out this year. And so I think the best way to keep up with the genre is through the short fiction, because that's where the really interesting stuff happens. And so I always keep an eye out on the main magazines and websites to look for short fiction by international writers, and I think that's really where the genre is at, and the novels maybe follow at a distance.
Yeah, I think PJ Djili Clark, he writes lots of. They are first introduced with him his as short stories, and Aliette de Bodard as well, which is short stories, and then they moved to novels that sort of progressed to that, but sometimes based on their short story characters. I do. It is good introduction. You read a short story and say, "Great, that was great. I'd love to read more by that author."
Well, there's the idea that you progress from short stories to novels, which has always been, I think, the case in genre. But I think in actual fact, most novelists I know have only ever written novels. They've never written short fiction.
Right.
I think what happens is that we lose the short story writers to novels because no one writes short stories, and they don't pay very well. So we lose people like Aliette and so on, because eventually the lure of the novel becomes too strong, which is
Yeah.
what happened to me. And I hate novels. I don't want to write novels, but
So, what's
Well,
the joy of
obviously-
a? Oh, sorry. I
No,
was
go
going
on,
to say, what's
sorry,
the
go on,
joy of
sorry,
a?
sorry.
What's the joy of a short story for you as a writer?
it's so much more immediate. It's so much more concise. You get in, you get out. There's no flab. There can't be. And I think
Yeah.
novels, so many novels today are just short stories that have been bloated.
Bloated, yeah.
And there's a middle. I can't do middles. This is my problem. I can't write a middle. I don't know why. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings, where they go. I love Lord of the Rings, by the way. I don't, but they go to one place and then they go to another place and they go to another place, and I don't know how to do that. Then I can wander around for 1,000 pages. But obviously that works really well for a lot of people. And if I had spare time, it might well work for me again. But I just like short stories, and also when you're writing a novel, because the whole process is so long that it's going to take you so long to write it. It's going to take so much longer to get published. You do a short story, you can finish it, send it out, and it might even be published 2 weeks later. And you get that immediate reaction, that immediate publication. And I just love them. I mean, I've really enjoyed doing those vampire mysteries things recently, and I think for science fiction, it's also the perfect medium. So most of my science fiction output is in short stories that all belong to the same sort of future history, which is another very old science fiction thing. Then I think Heinlein sort of named it, was the first to say to call it a future history. So they all link, and then you get to explore that world at your own leisure.
Well, I have to say that I discovered your writing through the Vampire, the Judge D short stories. So I just want to personally say thank you, because I just love the concept. I love the idea of a vampire judge, judging other vampires. I love the kind of interconnectedness between himself and Jonathan. And will we see more, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit frustrating that of all
They
the
are
things
so charming.
of all the things I've done, it's these really silly vampire mysteries that everyone seems to like. Yeah, there's a lot more of them. Well, not a lot more, but there's one more scheduled already for publication, which will be it's called Seven. I'll tell you exclusively. It's
Yay.
called Seven Vampires, a judge theme mystery, and there's a lot of. It's kind of a take on Agatha Christie, And then there were none. That's not really a spoiler. Because one of the fun things with doing them is that Jonathan is the human. He always thinks that the solution is a fiendishly complicated Agatha Christie solution. And the whole point is they're vampires. They don't care. They just kill people. They're not scheming, Yeah,
I just love the fact that when you've got Jonathan, all he can think about is eating food around them. It's just brilliant.
It's been fun. I don't know where it came from. I mean, I basically just wrote the one story just to explore the idea. And then Tor, the website that publishes it, they got really excited for it, and they said, "Well, if you want to write more, we'd like them." And I said, "Okay." Then I'm so unused to someone being enthusiastic about anything, so I said, "Yeah, sure." And then once you get into it, and the plotting part is fun, it's working it all out. So there's another one coming out, and then there's 2 more kind of on hand. And I'm trying to plot the 7th one, which is supposed to be the executioner of Epinal, because I've just been to Epinal, so I thought, why waste the research? It's very, very creepy town, actually.
Is it?
Lots of very gothic-y place. So yeah, I have a title, but I have no plot whatsoever.
So how long would it typically take you to write one of those short stories then? A week, 2 weeks?
I don't know. So the writing part itself is really fast. I mean, I think they could take like 3 to 4 days to write, but that's only after you've done everything else. So that probably takes like that takes longer, and that's really frustrating because you're just sitting in front of the computers, kind of trying to work out who killed who and why, and there's always the case that it has to be fair to the reader, so the reader has to be able to solve the mystery before the detective.
Yeah.
And there's always some people who do, and then they're like, "Oh, it was so easy to solve the mystery." It's like, well done, you. You get a gold star. But that takes a while. I mean, the last one I wrote actually took me a long time because I started it, and then I left it for like 3 or 4 months, and then came back to it and pushed through. So I haven't read it yet. I'm not sure it's. I mean, I'm hoping it's okay, but it might be absolute rubbish. And the plotting is the hard part. So
is that just relating to the vampire mysteries though, rather than, or do you do the same amount of plotting for the By Force Alone and the Hood? Was that similar, or was it a different process for you?
Well, By Force Alone has the benefit of kind of having a plot imposed from the outside, but when you look at the Arthurian story, it makes no sense in terms of a plot. Basically, it has a great opening, which is the whole Uther, Arthur is born, the sword in the stone, fighting the other kings, becoming king. Yay! He becomes king, right? And then he's the king, and then there's a very short bit where the younger guy comes along and kills him. And I think that's why in the 12th century they started adding the Grail mythos to it. So the whole quest for the Grail, because nothing happens in the middle. Nothing really happens. So they're like, okay, they'll go and look for the Grail for like 40 years, to keep them occupied. So I had this problem that I had a basic plot from the outside, but it didn't really follow any reasonable outline. And Robin Hood was even harder to do because that doesn't have any plot. It's just a bunch of random stories. It's more characters and setting than a story. And that was the one book where I had no idea what I was doing. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and it was the only case I've ever had where the book took over and just wanted to be what it wanted to be, and I was like, fine, I'll go along with it, but I disagree completely with where you're going with this. But but I can't make you go in another direction. And it was even like, I think 2 weeks before I finished it, my agent phoned me and he said, "Is the book any good?" And I said, I have no idea. Like, I couldn't tell at that point if it was even going to work out. And I somehow got to the end and I thought this worked, but I don't really know how. And it's obviously a very, very odd book. But I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the fact that I didn't really know. Like, it knew what it wanted to be, and it was a lot of fun. Once I gave into it, it was a lot of fun to do. So it always surprises you.
Very humorous, but I've read both. By Force Alone, that was the first novel of yours that I read, and just hooked me from beginning to end. And Hood, the same. The humor is what I loved. Where does that come from? Is it just natural, or?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is very dark humor. I mean, even if you look at A Man Lies Dreaming, which is an incredibly dark novel about Hitler and the Holocaust, and so on. It's also a very funny book about Hitler and the Holocaust. And I think that's the point of the humor, is that it's there to illuminate the darkness. So I was very surprised when people, I read a few reviews that said, "Oh, By Force Alone is grimdark." It's like, it's not grimdark. It doesn't take itself that seriously. The sword fights are literally sort of slash hack stab. I think that's the culmination. That's the great final sword battle. And I was chatting to a fantasy writer in the pub once, and I kind of expressed my dismissal of people who write detailed sword fights, and he said, "Well, I study the broadsword." And I thought, of course you do. Like, of course you do. Had to be. I think it's there to, because you are writing about serious stuff ultimately. I mean, By Force Alone, if you look at it closely, it's a novel about nationalism and xenophobia and the way modern England is it's really a commentary on, where we are now. But it wouldn't, not writing an article for the Guardian. You know, I'm writing it has to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were born in Israel and you've lived in different parts of the world. How has this life experience, has it influenced your work? And if it has, which particular book has it influenced the most?
Well, I mean, it must do. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things I realized early on is, you know, I was living in Southeast Asia for a while in Laos, and I was writing these sort of cyberpunky stories set there, and they're absolutely fine. You know, there's nothing particularly wrong with them. They continue. Some of them continue to be reprinted today. But they didn't feel honest to me. I was writing as an outsider about things I didn't really know, and I think you can get away with writing as an outsider to an extent. And actually, one of the things I enjoy is writing about England as an outsider, because to me, it's a great target to kind of just keep poking at. But you know, I realized that I need to be sort of honest and write about the things I do know and I do care about. And so a novel like Central Station, which is a science fiction novel, but it's set in Israel, and I felt I could write that honestly. I couldn't, in a way that I couldn't do if I was writing about somewhere that I sort of knew because I lived there at some point. And the novel that I've got coming out next year is a novel called Moreau, and it's a huge, essentially it's literary fiction, though it's very it's a historical epic, and it's set in Israel over 40 years of history, and really explores a lot of dark aspects. And that's not a funny book as well. That was one of the things I kind of said. I'm gonna stop doing everything that I'm used to doing. So there's not going to be any literary references and hidden jokes, and it's not going to be funny. Hopefully it's still good, but it's not that funny. But I just thought I'll try and do something different. The writing will be very spare, and you know, not. I really enjoy writing when I can just have fun with the writing, and this time I'll just tell the story as it is, you know. So that's very much personal and influenced by what I know, and I seem to do one book about England, maybe set here, and ideally one science fiction book, and then maybe one book about Israel or thereabouts. That's how it seems to work. As long as I can keep doing a bit of science fiction every now and then, I'll be happy.
I think culturally, the Israel, I mean, it'd be fascinating from your point of view. I don't think you see much fiction. Well, certainly in English language, not that I've come across. There may be some that explores that culture in a way that's, I say, sympathetic, or not sympathetic, but in a true way.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with my book next year, because that's not a book that's been written before, I don't think. Certainly, I'm not conscious of any book in Hebrew that does what it does. And it's a book that doesn't really spare its punches. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with it. But the other thing was, because I was writing such a specific novel, and it was all based on historical research, I was spending my nights in newspaper archives, basically, and really digging up stuff that I didn't know, but I think some of the stuff I dug up, no one knows. And the more I was writing about this extremely specific, because it's also a period piece, right? I'm writing about the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. The more specific I was getting, I realized that the more universal the book actually became, because the story I'm telling could have happened in any other country, paradoxically, you know, because the stuff that motivates violence and political violence and so on, it happened in every country, and you could apply the same book to America today, or you could apply the same book to, you know, Britain in the 60s. It really doesn't matter that much. But ideally, what I know gives it that authenticity. It gives it that sense of being there.
Thank you.
So you've published the 5 Apex anthologies about science fiction featuring international writers. Do you feel this has helped international writers to become more recognised? And what are the barriers?
No, I don't think anyone ever bought those books. People don't really care, which has been kind of a consistent theme throughout the whole thing. Is that you can never get people interested. I think what happened though, because I seem to have a decent eye for what's good, is that if you look at a lot of the writers in the early volumes, they're now major science fiction and fantasy writers. So we published I published Aliette de Bodard, Tadley Thompson, I think Nnedi Okorafor is in it. There's a whole bunch of writers who publishing maybe wasn't that receptive to at the time. I remember Tada had a lot of problems finding a publisher, just because the genre was very slow to change. But I don't think that yeah, I'd like to claim the credit, but I really don't think he did very much. I think the only people it really appealed to were other international people, So I know there's like a guy, Francesco in Italy, who started a publishing imprint to promote international science fiction, which has been nice. And occasionally I'll meet those other enthusiasts, and they all want to, they all want to do that. And I'm like, you do it because I can't do it anymore. So please, you guys give it a go. But I think it's, maybe it's getting better slowly. I'm hoping that we'll get more international stuff. But it's just shocking to me that there's so little of it, and there's no such thing as regularly publishing translations in English, which every other country in the world, it's a regular thing that you publish translations, and it's very frustrating. I keep wishing someone gave me a publishing imprint and said, "There's some money, and go and find us some books, and I'll have the books in an afternoon."
What are the barriers then? Is it publishers? Is it just not? Are they just not willing to take a punt on somebody that's unknown, even somebody who's from a different country? What do you think the barriers are?
Honestly, I mean, it's a conversation that you have repeatedly. Whenever you go outside of the Anglophone world, no one really understands it. I think the idea is that there's so many writers in English that they don't need to go beyond. But at the same time, if you're going to be publishing the same thing over and over, you're not going to get anything new. And I think, especially with genre fiction, you're really looking for something new, looking for something different. And yeah, it's a mystery to me. I mean, I like I said earlier when we were talking, I just spent a week in France, at a science fiction festival, and I came across, I met all these writers, and there's so much going on, and some of it looked amazingly cool. There's some books that I really want to read. I can't read French, unfortunately, but if I were a publisher, there's like 2 books that I came across. I would have just commissioned a translation straight away, because they sounded great, and yeah, it's frustrating. I grew up on translations, I grew up on translations from English, but I grew up on translations from a whole bunch of European countries, and that's something that I think is sorely missing in English.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of authors who write in English who are translated into other languages, but the reverse, as you're right, it doesn't always happen. Yeah, but I think I follow a lot of things. I think there is a rise certainly in the of different cultures. So certainly the Southeast Asian culture, for me, that was quite. I connect with that, and it's good to see those on the rise. But then they tend to be books that are written in English by authors who may have come from those cultures but will write in English.
Well, I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, it applies to me, it applies to Aliette, it applies to a whole bunch of people. Is that you choose to write in English because that is the gateway. So maybe if we had our way, we would be writing in a very obscure language.
Vietnamese.
Well, I mean, Hebrew is not exactly a universal language these days. But, and also don't forget, there's a lot of different Englishes around the world. So there's a lot of people who grew up with English as a first or second language. In all kinds of places. So yeah, one of the great things we're seeing is a lot of Southeast Asian writers working in English. I mean, Singapore is incredibly happening with genre right now. Yeah, and in my job, in a way, I get paid to go and read that stuff, and then I get to pick some of it and put it in a book, which is great.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for aspiring writers?
Yeah, go do something else.
Don't do it for the money.
Also, I mean, I thought about it I hate to go back to these vampires, but
please
go back to the vampires.
I was thinking about it during the pandemic quite a lot, that people were losing their jobs left, right, and center. Pilots were out of work, and I'm sitting at home writing vampire mysteries, and I'm okay. I'm saying okay. And I thought that can't be right. That's not how things should work. That's pilots should be making the money, not people writing vampire stories. So something is deeply wrong in that. So yeah, it doesn't really answer the question, does it? But I did think it did strike me as deeply odd that the pandemic was sort of, lockdown was fine, mostly. I think the best thing you can do when you begin is firstly, when you said about write every day. I know not everyone can write every day, but write when you can, because otherwise you don't have anything without the writing bit. But also, what I found really useful was to try and finish what you write, because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck on. And it doesn't actually have to be good at that point. I mean, you just have to finish it. And that's kind of what I was doing. I was finishing things that I knew weren't very good, but it was the exercise of finishing. I mean, one of the things I got into during the lockdown was making mobile phone games, making Android games.
Right.
I kind of taught myself to do it. And it's the same advice. It's basically, they say to you, if you can finish a game, you've already got further than most people who want to make games. And there's something called the game loop. So as long as the game starts, ends, and goes back to the beginning, if you can do that, you've already succeeded. And I was so proud. I was like, wow, I've got a game loop. That's amazing, because it just means you've created something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So that's really it. Otherwise, I would just say, just keep writing, and eventually you find the voice, you find your style, you find your themes. It's just about like doing everything else. It's just about getting better at it.
So, do you have a special Stephen King trunk where you've got lots of unfinished novels, or finished novels that you think, no, this is not the right time? Have you ever been into a trunk like that? If you've got one and reproduced something and polished it off and thought, yeah, this is really good, this is the right time to send it out into the world.
I've got my second children's book, which I wrote about 2 summers ago or something. So, and the original working title was Quarantine. And it went out to publishers about 2 weeks before we went into lockdown.
Oh, the timing.
Yeah, it's been awful. I mean, and the thing is, I think it's a really fun book, but the timing couldn't have been worse. So I think that's going to have to sit. That's going to have to sit, which really guts me, because I'd really love to see it come out, and I thought it was a fun children's book. But honestly, what was I thinking? The whole idea was that there's a global pandemic, but it only kills grown-ups, and the kids are fine.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Very on the nose.
But no, otherwise I've got, I've got a lot of them. I've got a lot of stuff that started and then ran out of steam or just wasn't very good, or I've got a whole folder of I've got books that it just weren't very good. Alternate endings, cut scenes, everything you want. Luckily, you don't have to burn them anymore after your death. You just kind of delete them. But yeah, I think it happens to everyone. If you can hit perfectly every single time, then that would be amazing. But that's not something I can do.
So you've mentioned it briefly a few times, but what can you tell us about any future books that you're working on? I know you've mentioned a book that you've got published next year. Can you tell us anything in detail about it without giving too much away?
No, I'm happy to give it all away. I mean, my pitch was very simple. I basically said, look, they're not going to give me a Booker Prize for writing about elves and aliens. So I need to take out the elves and the aliens, and then they'll give me the Booker Prize. And I wasn't sure that you can take out the elves and the aliens, but it turns out once it's not that hard, you just take them out, and then they're not there anymore. So that was kind of my pitch for it. No, it's a book called Maror, which I like because no one knows what that means, but it's only 5 letters, so it would look really good on a cover. And it's a big historical epic. It's like 150,000 word historical epic, set between the 1970s and the 21st century. So he takes in a whole lot of stuff. It's very it's not so much a crime novel, but it's interested in crime. It's not about solving mysteries, but it looks at kind of a bunch of real historical elements. It takes everything from the civil war in Lebanon to the drug cartels in Colombia in the 1980s, who were trained by Israeli mercenaries, which was fascinating. And also, interestingly enough, my dad seemed to kind of be a big part of this book, because every time I phoned him up and I said, listen, do you remember those guys who trained the mercenaries in Colombia? And he was like, yes, I went to school with that guy. He's a horrible person. And he gave me all these details. Or do you remember that murder in 1974? Oh, yeah, the guy they sent to prison, he was a lovely guy. He was a good friend of mine. I'm like, okay, so very useful, very useful. So it kind of looks at that sort of stuff. The other thing I've got coming out next year is a science fiction novel, because you have to have a little science fiction novel, which I wrote during the last lockdown. So I kind of reached that. The last lockdown was the worst lockdown, I think. And I basically, when you said about planning or not planning, and I usually kind of think ahead. This case, I just wanted to write something, something simple, and I couldn't work on that big novel I was doing. So I wrote about a robot who goes to a flower market, and it buys a flower, a rose, and he takes it to the desert and leaves it in the desert. And that was kind of the story. That was it. And I thought, I have no idea what this robot is doing, or what the deal with the flower is, or what's in the desert. But I kind of want to find out. So I wrote another short story. And at that point, the robot is digging something up in the desert. And I was like, I have no idea what the robot is doing, but I'd like to find out more. And then, I did another one. And then I kind of thought, you're not really writing short stories. You're writing a novel about a robot. And so I just followed it along, and I had no idea where it was going. But it was such an escapist fun to do that I could just write these little bit at a time. And so it's just a short novel, but it's coming out next year.
Excellent.
There's probably a bunch of other stuff. I don't know.
I'm going to have to read The Vampire Detectives, though. I like a vampire. I'm thinking,
you've sold it to us. You really have. You've sold it to us. I'm sitting there thinking, I've listened to all this and I thought, that's the one I want to read.
Yeah. See, that's the problem I have.
You made them sound far too entertaining.
It's kind of like Sherlock Holmes, who got Arthur Conan Doyle got so sick of Sherlock Holmes and he tried to kill him off. And everyone was like, we don't want to read your other stuff.
Just give us Vampire Detectives.
Vampire Detectives. What can you do?
I think if you
like comedy and historical, both The Hood and By Force Alone are fantastic books. Deliver everything from adventure, really, really funny. So that was my in, and just to say thank you to you, for writing them and giving hours of entertainment to read.
And so accurate to the original sources. No, but surprisingly they are. That's the weird thing. People don't really understand that they are, because the original sources are actually so bizarre. Yeah, they're not the Disney. The Grail being a comet. I think the Grail starts off as a saucer of blood, and then it becomes a star stone, and only then do we get this. And then the guy who invented Joseph of Arimathea and the secret society. I mean, we wouldn't have the Da Vinci Code. We wouldn't have like Indiana Jones without these guys who lived in the 12th century and didn't have Netflix. So they came up with all this stuff, and it's awesome.
Illuminati.
So one of the plans is to do a quartet of these books.
Yeah.
And then the one thing I really enjoy is the sort of the Guardians of the Grail. I can't remember what I called them. The secret brotherhood of the Keepers of the Grail or something. They pop up in the hood, and they're so much fun. I just want them to pop up through the centuries every now and then. Because so much of it is so ridiculous, but the ridiculousness I think helps write about the serious stuff.
Yeah.
Great.
Fantastic. So, have you got any more questions, Mark? Is that you at the? I'm just checking.
I think that's it. Yes,
there's nothing else coming through.
I've written down. Sure, I could think of a few more, but
something else, Sonia, that you had? So I'm just checking social media as we wait.
No, I think as the conversation went, questions popped up because it's great. We've got Lavie pinned to the into the window, so it's a fabulous opportunity to ask. Just any, there might be some weird and wacky questions for an author, but just to ask those questions that think, I wonder why that happened.
It's brilliant. So when you wrote for children, I've not read your children's, but what age were you kind of pitching at? Are you sort of primary school age or older?
Yeah, well, it's sold as a middle grade, as an 8 to 12, or 9 to 12. Is it 9 to 12 now? It's so specific in children's books, isn't it? It's like it's 9 to 12. And the thing is, I'm not even convinced that it is a children's book. I mean, it's a book called Candy in the UK. And it's actually got a bunch of different titles. So every language has a different title. So it's the Candy Mafia in America, and it's for a fistful of Smarties in Czech. A fistful of Smarties. And and Le Mafia de Bonbon in
That's great.
And it's called Secret Agent Candy for some reason in German, which is
wow.
So I've never had a book with so many different titles. I just really, I have this tiny shelf of all the foreign editions of it. But basically, it's a book about a girl detective who gets involved in a town where all chocolate and candy has been made illegal by the mayor, basically. So all the kids are smuggling chocolate. So it's kind of like, what is it? What's that classic film with the
Willy Wonka and the no, not Willy Wonka.
With the kids and the gangster kids.
Oh, the I know which would be
with good grief.
I know.
Yeah, with the splurge guns, and
custard pies.
Custard pies. Yeah, I can't remember what it's called now. Bugsy Malone.
Bugsy Malone.
Goodness.
It's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory meets Bugsy Malone. The pitch. But to be honest, I wasn't sure it was a children's book. It was my idea of a children's book, but I think my agent was like, "Well, it's very you." I wasn't sure what to do with it, and I just got very lucky with it that we had a French friend who read the manuscript and passed it on to his children's book publisher, and she wanted to buy it in France. So I was in this weird position. I had this book that no one knew about, but I had an offer from France, and then it was just before the Frankfurt Book Fair, and then people were like, "What's this book? What's this book?" So they had a bit of a hype build behind it. And then and now I can't sell another children's book. I should have stuck to sort of, Candy rather than pandemics. But it's a fun book. And, one part of the editing was actually to make it a little bit more palatable. So to speed up certain things. It was very heavily involved in terms of the editing. So things like speeding up the ending a lot more, having to stop more to reflect, I think, in children's books, so to sum up what's going on and to kind of, she has to work out what's going on a lot more. You know, in my head, the original version is still like the author's cut version, which is it's a darker version. And I'm like, well, one day we'll do the author's cut version. But it's nice. It's nice to do books for kids. I mean, it's really nice to get feedback from kids occasionally, and to see the book getting picked up occasionally. When I was in France just now, it's the only book that I kind of sold out of in the signing. I was in this big signing tent
Really?
next to Samantha Shannon, actually, which I don't know if you know how many people read her books. It was a humbling experience to sit there. I'm just waiting that someone might, you know, take a chance on a book, and she's signing away. But what I think it was, all the grandmothers kind of went past, and they were like, "Oh, what's this book? Okay, I'll take it." And I had to inscribe it for a lot of French grandkids. So that was really nice.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd love to do more children's stuff, but
It's interesting because last year's Cosmia, which Dave, the Cosmia director, had set the theme before, again, the pandemic had even been on the horizon, and the theme was, it's the end of the world as we know it. And we had quite a lot of children's authors and sort of teen authors, and the books were quite often about that topic, and they were, we absolutely loved it. It was great discussions. It was great because it was kind of it was a way for children maybe to explore what the year or the 2 years now had been like for them through fiction, which for some is kind of, it's helpful, but for others it's not what they want to read. But it was interesting. It was it was absolutely, we had a great festival. We had a great lineup, but all the books were very much about pandemics and yes, it was great timing. But we had it set, so we went with it. But yeah, it was definitely.
To be honest, no, I mean, I think every genre writer is now bragging about their pandemic book. You know, everyone had a pandemic book, and either just before or during the pandemic. I mean, my problem with pandemics, and I think we've proven this at this point, they're incredibly dull. They're occasionally horrific, but dull. And I hate pandemic books. Because it's like, I don't want to read about pandemics. It's zombie pandemics. It doesn't matter which pandemic it is. It's kind of horrible and slow and boring, as we found out. It's very, very unpleasant.
Yeah, there's no one in their books had included that toilet rolls will be a problem or anything like that. No one had really found that level of, you know, boring detail in the books. But yeah.
Well, you can always use some of those pandemic novels if you. But I shouldn't talk. I mean, I can't even sell mine. So it's
brilliant. Okay, what are we up to? We're almost coming end of time. If anyone's got any questions that they want to ask, please do send them in. I'm keep checking social media, but I can't see anything at the moment. Otherwise, I think we'll be drawing to a close, as entertaining as this has been. Yeah, I can't see more questions. Right then. Okay. So unless there's anything else you want to tell us about, Lavie, when we've got an audience, people to tell you about any of your books that you wanted to, that we haven't really touched upon or anything. Have I muted?
Right, yeah.
Am I planning to watch Dune?
Dune, yeah.
I mean, it sounds nice, doesn't it, going to a cinema?
Oh.
And it's the sort of film that you probably need to watch on a big screen, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, have you been to a cinema since this whole thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
I went to see James Bond with my wife a few days ago, and yeah, I was like that, but it was all right. Good experience, really well catered for and socially distanced, and it was the Everyman in Leeds, so it was, it was nice. So sat on sofas not on actual cinema seats next to people, so it felt a bit safer.
And I've been once. I think we went enthusiastically or not, after the last one. But yeah, it would be. I like the idea of going to the cinema more than actually. So I'm probably not going to the cinema, but I'd like to keep the option open that I will go to the cinema. I like I like the idea of a lot of things that I'm probably not going to actually be doing. But let's keep a door open for Dune.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you read Dune, Lavie?
Yeah. Quite a long time ago at this point, but yeah, I never read all of the Dune books.
No.
I mean,
No.
there were quite a few of them, but I like the first one. I like the last one, weirdly.
Yeah.
Right.
That was.
Yeah.
I'm just
I was
reading
trying.
the second one now. It's really good. Yeah.
Right. I think I read the first one probably when I was a teenager, and it really struck a chord with me. I just loved it completely, but I never really read the others.
In Israel, they actually the translator refused to publish the second and third books. He said they were too boring to publish.
Excellent.
So he literally published the first Dune and then the fourth Dune.
Right.
And he just skipped the originals. So quite a bold editorial choice there.
Oh, that's real power there, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
Really is.
No,
never mind editing out the bits you don't like. Just edit the whole book. Yeah, that's very cold. Right. Okie dokes. Right. Okay. I think we're just coming to the end of the hour now. So if there's nothing else anyone else wants to ask, I can't see the comments or a chat coming on the side. So I'll draw it to a close. Thank you so much, Lavie. It's been absolutely, it's been so interesting, really interesting. And like I say, we've all got a little book list now, which I'll come on to in a second, what people can do with the little book list that they've been developing during the evening. So what have I got here? I've got, if anybody wants to find out more, if they've just coming across Lavie for the first time, you can follow him on Twitter. There's his Twitter handle there, which is nice and easy, that one. Lavie Tidhar. Now, if you're wanting to read any of his books, so you can either obviously go and visit one of Kirklees libraries, or you can go to Read. Now, let me just get you up the details. So, as I said at the beginning, our friends at Read are supporting the Cosmia Festival. I'm just going to bring up another screen. So you can go to Read, and I'll give you the details where they are, to get a 20% off discount on any of the books from the authors who are taking part in Cosmia this year. And all you need to let them know is that you've attended the events, which I think is rather awesome of them. And for those of you who don't know Read, it is right next door to Home Firth Library, so you absolutely should know Read. There we go. So that's the address for them. So it's Read, Home Firth, 41 Huddersfield Road in Home Firth. Or we've got a little web. I'm putting these on, and then you can always rewind and find this again later. That's where you can find them online. Okay, so 20% off discount. So Christmas presents is what I'm thinking is a really good timing, this one. Our next Cosmia event is going to be on Monday now at 11 o'clock, and it's a picture book. We've been talking about picture books this evening because we are an all-encompassing festival. You can watch, I'll just bring it up so you can see who it's going to be. You'll see Karen Swan and Padma Gandra talking about The Tale of the Whale, which has a climate and environmental theme to this one. So I'd thoroughly recommend that. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. For those of you that are maybe from our adult audience watching this evening, although we've got lots of really fantastic teen novels, which I would thoroughly recommend watching those events coming up as well. But for those of you that are interested in books for adults, we've got Courtney Newland on Thursday at 7 o'clock. So if you can, please do join us for that. So otherwise, thank you so much, Lavie. That's been so interesting.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a great evening. And thank you, Mark and Sonia, as well. If everyone has a good rest of the evening, stay safe, everybody, and thank you for joining us. So that's the end of the broadcast. I'll bring it to an end now.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Lavie.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.